Hello, everyone. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
And my name is James.
Today, James, we are talking about the old fixture swings. Yeah, fixture swings, bit of FPL chat.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to go into, partly because they're difficult to find, and it feels more prominent in our minds, I think, because of this idea of being able to roll five free transfers. And I think the more people have got into the psyche of thinking about it, people are like, yeah, most of us aren't going to be able to do that. But I thought it was worthwhile taking a deeper dive at looking at moments when you may want to make transfers and help with some longer term planning. I think it would possibly also open up some ideas for people about when perhaps they want to use their first wild card. We'll look at that again in terms of a chip strategy podcast in a couple of weeks in more detail. But I wanted to dive into it myself because ordinarily, as I've said previously, you get something where you think, like take Chelsea's game week 2-7, brilliant run, and then it normally jumps where it's like, Newcastle were great, 8-14 or something like that, and they're quite
Yep.
obvious. It doesn't really exist. So I wanted to take a dive in to see, right, well, where does it happen where we can make these sort of transfers, particularly between some of the big clubs, or highlight some sort of chain moves you can make between some enabling assets as well. But I put a question to you first, Suj. With this ability to roll more transfers, does it change your psyche in any way in terms of the type of transfers you want to make? What I mean by that is ideally, you probably wouldn't think in your mind, well, I want to chain this 4.5 defender into this 4.5 defender. Does it make you feel like they're more precious, i.e. they should be spent on the big hitters?
No, it doesn't change my psyche in that way. No.
Not at all.
No. What it changes my psyche to, well, the thing is, I would like it to change my psyche to be more aggressive with a more all-in strategy. But that's not my nature of playing the game, right? I watched the winner of FPL 2 years ago, Ali, on a YouTube video. Forgive me, I might be with Gianni actually, I think. And he talked about how he's aggressive, and he had a couple of seasons inside the top like 250, and then completely was rubbish last year because he plays in a very aggressive way, right? Now, I would like to be able to roll transfers together so that I can say, right, go from an all in on Arsenal to go all in on Manchester United, to go all in on Chelsea, to go all in on. That's how I would like it to change my psyche, to be more aggressive in that way. But I also know that that's not my natural style of play. So I don't know if trying to use these roll transfers to change my psyche is actually a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, I think I mean to kind of elaborate on the point, it doesn't mean you should just be flipping between, say, Palmer, Saka, Foden as kind of the example throughout the season. Perhaps these can be more like Bowens to Gordons to Rashfords, for example. I just think in my head, I'm thinking more and more like I only want to be fixing problems in terms of enabling players. Absolutely, definitely. Basically, if they're almost injured, kind of would anything that I pick enabling, I really would want to look at if I decide on a late first wild card, I would want to look at completely dead. I feel like in the same way we'd be thinking, I don't want to take points hits so much. I'd be thinking, I don't want to waste transfers on that because there'd be more power in being able to roll because that might allow me in a few weeks to go from Palmer and Nkunku to Foden and Doku. It's kind of more the example you're using, isn't it? Can I go from like free Chelsea to free Man City in one go? And that would be way more powerful in the example that I use, where you've got Chelsea, have got six brilliant fixtures. Then it's clear it's Newcastle with three brilliant fixtures. It's much more difficult to find on the fixture schedule this year. It's way more balanced. And also in this middle of this period where we can use our first wild card, the majority of the top eight, if you will, have difficult fixtures together, partly where they play each other quite a lot. And it all happens at a similar time. The one anomaly to that is Manchester United, basically, who I can't sit here right now and go, yeah, I want a wild card so I can get the three best Manchester United assets. I think there'll be a real big period sort of in the middle part of the first half of the season where people won't want a wild card I think most people are going to want to use their first wildcard to cut quite early on, or if you can, leave it till quite late, sort of going into December. Actually, in the middle of it, as I'm going to show you some stuff, doesn't feel worthwhile using it. I don't think.
I really, really love the idea. Uh, we'll probably have we will have a conversation about when to do it. But I love the idea of rolling 5 transfers, so smashing out 5 transfers, followed by a free hit or wild card, followed by a free hit or wild card, because you kind of get 3 weeks of, in essence, wild card back to back to back. If there was a period where you could show me, right, you can steam into 3 consecutive weeks, I would love that just for the enjoyment of the game. But I feel like you're going to tell me it's just not really there where it's worth it.
Might be more in the second half, maybe of the
Yeah, which
season,
is
maybe more
fine.
than
But
the
then
first.
that'll be for my second wild card, so I won't
I'm
have to use my first
I'm
wild
not going to
card.
look into second half of the season now, folks. Don't
No,
worry. There's
no, no,
no
no, no.
point thinking about. And again, we'll do chip strategy in future weeks in terms of bench boost prospects and stuff like that. Which again, I'll happily say now, as I said on my stream Friday, I may well be using the bench boost in game week 1. And part of that is to do with the analysis of this, like when to use that first wild card and when are these fixture swings where we can use these free transfers for good. When I start with game week 2, Suj, and an idea off the back of game week 1, what would you want to invest in? I.e., looking at some teams who've had perhaps a difficult game week 1, and then you want to invest in game week 2. So I think the obvious two, as I said, Chelsea got a great run of fixtures, game week 2 to 7. City at home to Ipswich, fairly obvious, good little 3-game run there. And Fulham and Southampton have challenging game week 1s at Old Trafford and St James's Park, respectively, and then have some good runs themselves. I don't think anyone particularly wants to spend their first transfer on a Fulham or a Southampton player in game week 2, but you might want to do that sort of thing if you're looking at short-term stuff. The problem is, when you want to invest in City or Chelsea in game week 2, the question would be like, okay, well, how am I getting there? Like, what do you want to sell? Now, the only case really would be Arsenal, maybe.
True. Also, I mean, is it worth it? And we talked on previous shows about how Sky used to enforce the overhaul after 4 weeks. Are we trying to set up a dead team for the first 4 weeks? If this was Sky, it wouldn't be a question of even thinking about transferring in the second week. You just set it up, suck it in for game week 1, and leave it be. For me, like a game week 2 transfer would be fixing a problem. Like if I really want City or Chelsea from 2 onwards, I genuinely think I would just start with it.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that game finished 4-4 last year as well,
Yeah,
anyway.
it was game of the season, arguably, right?
Oh, no, not arguably,
Not
definitely was
arguably,
game
it
of the
was.
season last year. One of the greatest Premier League games I've seen, actually. So yeah, I think start with it. Absolutely. And if you've got a Guardiola, I think you generally don't leave out a City defender anyway. I mean, I think we've probably come to that opinion on Arsenal defenders now as well. Start with it. Yeah, I think if you want City or Chelsea, start with it. So I think again, unless you're planning to wildcard like that early on or using the chip that early on, game week 2 does look right to roll. But what you've got to factor in your mind is the psyche. So let's say you don't start with Haaland, Palmer, and Kunku, and that game does finish, let's say, at 2-2, more realistic this year. And Haaland scores twice, looks great up front. Foden assists a couple. Palmer's playing in the 10 position, and Kunku's up front as the number 9. And you haven't gone with any of them. And then you look at what's happening next. Now, with Chelsea, you can probably wait a bit more. But with City, you're going to think, oh my God, this is the thing. And I think one of the big themes over the last, well, probably each passing day, the more the game's open, you could kind of feel Haaland's ownership just slowly beginning to grow. The more people look at it and think, yeah, actually, if I don't go with him, how am I getting there?
That's the biggest reason why I may end up with Haaland is like I just don't want to give myself the headache of having to get there
No,
in
no, no.
game
And
two, three,
I
or four.
completely respect and understand that. I also think it's worth saying that looking at, say, Salah at home to Brentford, or perhaps Heung-min Son at home to Everton, or even like an Isak away to Bournemouth, or even Palmer at Wolves. Like there are alternatives. And there also is worth remembering there are alternatives within Manchester City. If you start with, say, Phil Foden as an example, would it be the worst thing in the world to captain Vardio against Ipswich? Who knows? There could be a massive haul in there. But I think there's a possibility, Suj, that if Chelsea City has that sort of scenario, I think that there's going to be a number of people will wildcard in game week 2
Yeah, no
and not
doubt.
plan to.
No
I
doubt. I think if
really
I
think
was
that
in that,
that will happen.
I would definitely be tempted. I don't think I would. But if I was in a situation without the 4 or 5 players that you mentioned there, I mean, the big hitters would be the ones you mentioned, Haaland, Foden, Guardiola, Nkunku, Palmer, maybe a Chelsea defender as well. Sure, I would be tempted.
But ideally, you'd roll in game week 2, wouldn't you? I think we've
Yeah,
always liked to try and do that anyway, if you could.
yeah,
And it becomes like, okay, he's injured, fine, I've got to make a transfer. But ideally, yeah, game week 2, roll. And I've seen a lot of people already planning for that eventuality, both with and without Erling Haaland. If you move on to game week 3 and you're looking at swings, I think there's one here that you can argue at players at sort of similar value. Tottenham to Aston Villa's on the table. So Tottenham start with Leicester and Everton in the first 2. Villa go to
yeah,
West Ham, which is a challenge, and then obviously play Arsenal in game week 2. Then Villa's run of fixtures game week 3 to 6 is great, whereas Tottenham are walking into Newcastle away and then Arsenal at home, and then there's Manchester United away and Brighton away a couple after that as well. So I think I could see that. That's the sort of one. You might have players at a similar price bracket you can identify and you go, yeah, I'll move that. So one scenario might even be in terms of your future plan is go, right, I'm not going to start with Ollie Watkins, despite that massive ownership. I will punt Heung-min Son at the start instead and maybe start with a João Pedro and Adam Armstrong or something really cheap. Perhaps even like Chris Wood might even be
yeah,
one for the first couple or so, and then you hit game week 3 and you go, right, I'm gonna downgrade Son into the cheaper level of midfielders. Perhaps Nkunku by this stage might have shown himself really good as an out OOP forward, and then you get say Wood up to Watkins. That's the
yeah.
sort of move that I think you could plan in your mind for game week 3. That is a definite swing, Tottenham to Aston Villa.
Agreed.
If I move forward to game week 4, I think Brighton come into a little period there where they've got Ipswich and Nottingham Forest at home, which looks really strong with 2 consecutive home games. Their fixtures either side are rough. So it's like it's Arsenal away before, and then afterwards their run from game week 6 to 11 is
Ooh,
disgusting for Brighton. So it really would be really short term. But I think people will look at those 2 fixtures and think, I would potentially like some of that. And it's also the end of Nottingham Forest 3-game run. So I could see a scenario here where people went, okay, yeah, let's go Wood to João Pedro, Morgan Gibbs-White to Karo Mitoma, that sort of thing. But again, is that the sort of transfer you want to be making
well,
early on? But I also think those who start with Forest early on will then hit that same period where Forest are going to Liverpool in game week 4 and looking at Brighton playing Ipswich at home and think, okay, what can I do here? What have I learned about Brighton early on? But it might be another week where you want to go, okay, that's a good week to jump. Game week 5, although you could certainly start with them, is a beginning of a joke run for Everton, I think. They're really good periods for them, really, kind of up to about game week 15. If you look at Everton's fixtures, game week
yeah.
16 to 19, they play Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Man City. So it means
You'd say game week 2, Bournemouth at home, like you'd have to stomach Aston Villa away to start. Game week 3, sorry, for Everton. You could go 2 weeks earlier.
yeah, absolutely. There's a strong case to start with an Everton defensive player. I've said previously, I think Mikalenko is highly likely for me. And yes, I wouldn't be intending to start him at Tottenham in game week 2 or Aston Villa game week 4. But the point being is, in that period from 1 to 14 of the top 8, of the expected top 8 or last year's top 8, they only play 4 of them, right?
Yep.
And those might be the teams that finish 5th to 8th. Tottenham away, Villa away, Manchester United away, and Newcastle at home. Newcastle at home's game week 7. But that run from game week 5, where they go to Leicester, up to arguably they play Wolves at home in 14. Or you could come off when they play Brentford at home in 11 after that, before they go to Old Trafford. That's a really good run of fixtures. The problem is looking at what would you maybe want to sell in game week 5 to get there? Well, the conclusion that some might come to is Manchester City.
Mm-hmm.
City play Arsenal and then they go to Newcastle the following week. Now, do you want to be using transfers to go from Manchester City to Everton?
No,
No, you probably don't.
no,
So I think it's
no.
one, again, the right strategy there would be, rather than going, I want to attack Everton in game week 5, it would be start with it. if there's something there that you want, and I think most are quite interested defensively, with all the changes to the BPS, one team that might still show up quite good is Everton. As said, I'm really interested in Mikolenko.
Mm.
Game, go on.
I was going to say maybe Manchester United. You could come off Manchester United because if you started with United, they've got what Fulham at home, Southampton away is two of the first four. Then after that, it gets a little bit more difficult with look, Palace. Yeah, fine, but Tottenham, Villa, Brentford, West Ham, Chelsea. That's a trickier run for Manchester United. You could, if you started with Onana, move to Pickford. Who wants to do goalkeeper
You're not.
transfers?
Nah, nah, nah,
Nah,
nah.
but even I don't know if you started with a
It's
Dallo or
yeah,
Luke
but then
Shaw,
even now,
and then he gets his
even then,
injury, which he's going to do. You could then move it on.
if you looked at United's and Everton's fixtures over the first four, do you really want to plan in to go from like Martinez to Mikolenko, for example? You
Well, this
don't.
is it, right? I don't think anything you've said is anything I want to
And,
plan
and
in
I
right now.
don't
It's
see
just
me sitting
not
there and going,
exciting.
I don't see me sitting there and getting to game week 5 and going, oh yeah, I want to drop Garnacho to like Jack Harrison, for example. Like I
It
don't see
just,
that.
yeah,
My
don't
interest in
exist.
Everton is defensively.
Yeah,
Something might change. Who knows? Someone like Ilman and Dyer might suddenly step forward. Game week 6, I think there's a few flips. Now, if you did take that route where you went and gambled Brighton for those 2 games, you're going to want to come off. I think this is a good period, game week 6, where you can begin to look at Brentford. There's a really good run up there till game week 13. Or again, if you want a really short term hop off, Bournemouth play Southampton at home and Leicester away, then themselves come into a rough run. So you need to keep jumping. Forest to Brighton, Brighton to Bournemouth. This does exist, but is this where you want to waste your transfers? One in game week 6 to look at might be Newcastle to Arsenal. Arsenal would come off the back of the difficult 3 away games that they've got in the first 5, and then walking straight into Leicester at home and Southampton at home themselves consecutively. 2 consecutive home games against promoted teams. That will be a pinch point, I think, where if people have gone, oh, I wanted to skip Arsenal for the start, you're going to want to invest. And the
yeah,
easiest way to do that might be off Newcastle, who do have a couple of good fixtures after they play Manchester City, but it is Manchester City in 6, so your excuse feels like it's there. Good first 5 fixtures for Newcastle and jump. So could you look in game week 6 of moves like Isak to Havertz or Gordon to Martinelli, Trossard, Odegaard, whatever steps up by that point? Or maybe it's your point where you go and invest into Arsenal defensively and you go, yeah, I will use Fabian Schär as a placeholder near enough
yeah.
price, maybe during Timber, you'd have clarity on by that point, for example. So I see Newcastle to Arsenal in game week 6 as a sort of move I wouldn't mind planning in. Game week 7, City come off the back of their 2 difficult fixtures of Arsenal, Newcastle, and then again have the sort of run that will make you want to hide behind the curtains if you haven't got the big man. Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home, Bournemouth away, then Brighton away, who they beat comfortably last year. Tottenham at home, you've got the guarantee of chances before they then come into a more difficult run again. So game week 7, I feel like is another pinch point for Manchester City where you'll be nervous about not having them. The problem is when you look at the fixtures of the other top teams in game week 7. So like Arsenal have got that Southampton home fixture.
Southampton. Mm.
Chelsea's good run kind of ends the following week. They've got Nottingham Forest at home. Liverpool at Palace. Do you want to switch from Liverpool to Arsenal there? No, not really. And we've already spoke, if you were going to sell Newcastle, it was probably the week before. Tottenham arguably are coming back into a good run at that point in game week 7, where maybe you'd want to invest in them as well. So there isn't anywhere to get back to City. And I think there has to be a real consciousness of that. Game week 2 and then the period from game week 7 are 2 points where you're going to think, I want to invest in Manchester City if I don't own. And where you're going to get there from is going to be tough because from the players at the similar prices, I don't think you're going to want to sell.
Yeah.
It's the case to come back off. We mentioned those Fulham Southampton runs. They kind of end there in game week 7. What are you doing? Storing up money from Adam Armstrong to Erling Haaland? I don't think you're going to be leaving 9.5 million in the bank somehow. So there has to be an awareness. If you don't start with City and you're not wildcarding early, how are you getting there? Because the roots of what you sell, there's going to be reluctance. Game week 8, you could make a case for a Chelsea to Manchester United swing. I think this is one of the rare ones where you could store up and go your Palmer and Kunku and perhaps a defensive one. and flip free transfers. Whether you're going to want to do that going into Manchester United is questionable. And I wouldn't say it's not like an extraordinary run. It's basically the end of Chelsea's run, which is then tough. So Chelsea from game week 8 walk into Liverpool away, Newcastle at home, Manchester United away, and Arsenal at home. That's rough. If you've
Yeah.
had 3 Chelsea in that period 2 to 7, I think you're gonna hit that point and go, well, what do I want to do here? So Manchester United have Brentford at home, West Ham away, then they play Chelsea themselves. Then there's another few good fixtures, Leicester, Ipswich, Everton before they go to the Emirates. So it's not like a steam into period, but if you're looking to come off Chelsea at that particular point, arguably it's Manchester United. Now you could make the case, well, I'll go Palmer to Foden, but then you've just missed Foden at home to Fulham. Did you want to do that?
Mm.
That's the point. So you're looking at the key points where someone's about to come into something good off of something bad. So Chelsea to Manchester United maybe in game week 8. But again, if you go from Palmer, where you going? You're going to Fernandez, I suppose.
I do think with Chelsea, it's going to go one of two ways. Where we're going to get there, and they're going to be playing. They're going to have clicked, and we're going to be like, okay, they're doing really well here. They've been on a good run. You're gonna if they do go on a good run during that period, scoring goals and Kunku Palmer, all delivering points, clean sheets that to be had in there. I think it makes it even harder to come off though, because you're like, okay, well actually maybe Enzo's got on playing well, and this is where it clicks for Chelsea. Do you then want to go and come off these players that are doing well for you, particularly in Kunku, right? We know that he's at a potential game-breaking price of 6.5. He jumps up to 7 in that period because he's doing so well. That's going to be hard to sell to move to a Manchester United player. If it's a Robert Sanchez or what have you, I don't even know if he'll be first choice, but let's assume he is at 4.5 and there's a few clean sheets in there. You're not going to want to necessarily come off. So, or Chelsea are going to be a car crash and you're going to want to dump that stuff earlier anyway. And you might just think, do you know what? Do I need this? Let me just get rid of it, because they've same old stuff from Chelsea where they're unreliable. They got better, but we don't know. I think it's going to go one or two ways, where you're going to dump it earlier, or it's going to be a very hard sell because they're actually doing quite well.
If you look at game week 9, Arsenal and Liverpool play each other, and you certainly make a case that's the beginning of more difficult runs for each. Particularly Arsenal have possibly what even might be a season-defining 3-game period of Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, and Chelsea away between 9 and 11. So I think when you hit that, you'll be thinking, I'm not sure I want to carry through if you've got solid coverage. Similarly with Liverpool, after Arsenal, Brighton at home is always a challenge, and they play Villa. They are home games though. Southampton away, then they play City and Newcastle consecutively. So if you cluster that as a 6, I think it's a case to say move off Liverpool there. And I think it's worthwhile at that point going, well, where would it go to?
Where?
Obviously. So
yeah, it was exactly my question. I'm like looking, because I'm looking at these
it's not
fixtures.
great.
Where?
No, it's not. So
West Ham?
the 2 teams really come into good run of fixtures in game week 9. One is Fulham, where it comes back around. They've got a run of Everton, Brentford, Palace, Wolves, which is quite nice for a 4-game week period. And it's the start of an absolutely kind of joke period for Wolves. It doesn't particularly start there because they go to Brighton in game week 9. So Brighton's a little bit up in the air whether they're going to be good or not this year. Then they have this ridiculous run Wolves that begins in game week 10 that carries up to game week 18, basically. It's a staggeringly good run. And if you look at Wolves' first 9 game week fixtures, you know why that becomes a really good run, because they play everybody good at the start, basically. Again, what are you going to do? Oh, I want to go Havertz to Cunha. You could, I mean, something like Havertz to Cunha is not that far away, I guess, in price. If you get there and you want to sell Salah, though, good luck. I think more the point is you probably need to retrace your steps and go, I need to sell Liverpool earlier, I think.
Mhm.
So when Liverpool go to Palace, you go, I don't really want to sell it, but that's the start of City's run. So I think you probably need to go earlier, because if you go Liverpool City there, you've missed Fulham at home, Wolves away. Whereas I think it's a real it's a real skill if you can to come off someone perhaps 1 or 2 before the good fixture run ends. Because for Liverpool, Crystal Palace away and Chelsea at home, they're both challenges, but they're not bad fixtures. No fixture for Liverpool, what we've seen so far, and it might change, but no fixture for Liverpool at Anfield is particularly bad, right?
Yep.
So the skill might be to come off Liverpool earlier, because I do think if you want to come off Arsenal, Liverpool in game week 9, you are going to look back to City, because we've got Southampton at home. It's the
Mhm.
same thing. If you're sitting there with Salah as your one premium, and you're, oh shit, Liverpool are playing at Arsenal, and Haaland's got Southampton at home. Yeah, maybe the trick there will be to make that flip a couple earlier. Game week 10, I think, is a really good week potentially to roll, because this is coming into a period where some teams have got some really challenging fixtures. It is arguably the end of Villa's good run. They go to Tottenham in game week 10, Liverpool in game week 11, and they also go to Chelsea in game week 13. But I think moving off Villa, you could kind of pick your poison of where you go. It might be if Watkins has had a great start to the season as they did last year, you go, yeah, do you know what? I've got too much value.
Stomach it. Yeah.
And also, if you look at Villa, say 14 to 16, there's a really good run of fixtures there where you think I might want him back, or just stomach it possibly. Game week 11, there's a case to come back into Newcastle. They have a couple of good fixtures. Their run is a little bit more off-putting because they play Liverpool in 14, but it is at St James's Park. And I think if you ignore that, they've got a really good run from 11 up to basically like Boxing Day. And they play Aston Villa on Boxing Day, game week 18, and they've got a couple of challenging away games. But again, at this point, how you're getting there's a little bit challenging. And one of the reasons for that is game week 12, which is one I'd looked at previously. I think this is a potential free hit week, and we'll talk about it more. The reason for that is the fixtures that the biggest clubs have. Now, they'll be difficult to fit in, admittedly, but if you get the right 11, it might work quite nicely. It's a week after an international break. So subject to what, say, the big clubs are playing in, say, the Champions League afterwards. But if you take, say, the Europa League teams, it's international break, game on a Saturday, game on a Thursday. Like, are they rotating much? It would only be, you'd be concerned about your South American players, the usual concern. Kickoff times
The
will obviously have
12:30, but Klopp's
kickoff
not around anymore, so Liverpool violins won't be.
kickoff times will obviously have a factor. But in game week 12, the only one of the top 8 that's got it rough is Tottenham, and they go to Manchester City. So I still think that wouldn't put you off Manchester City assets. Arsenal have Forest at home, Liverpool, Southampton away, Chelsea, Leicester away, Newcastle have West Ham at home, Manchester United go to Ipswich, and Villa go to Palace. But other than Manchester United, and you could make a case for Newcastle, the fixtures either side of 12 for these teams isn't great. So City of Brighton away and Liverpool away, Arsenal with Chelsea away and West Ham away, Liverpool have Villa at home, Man City at home, Chelsea at Arsenal at home, and Villa at home. The point being is you might not have quite the concentration that you'd imagined on some of these big clubs, and in game week 12, just bang in the middle of it, looks astonishing, but then gets really tough again. But would you free hit to get the best players? Wouldn't you already have them? This is part of the point. And so you could argue game week 12 is a swing, but it's not, because then everyone's got a tough fixture again in game week 13.
Yeah, I get that. Are you not? You haven't highlighted Manchester United's run from game week 11, the week before, to go into. I looked at that as Leicester at home, Everton at home, Forest at home, Bournemouth at home, Ipswich away, and yes, you've got Arsenal and City as away games in that run as well. But 5 of those 7 are really good fixtures, and depending on who you picked and who you owned, like Garnacho, for example, at his price is easily benchable for Arsenal away, City away, or even a Dallo if he's playing or whatever, is easily benchable for those couple of fixtures. I really like United prior to that.
It is good, but it's the same problem as I mentioned with Newcastle. Like, how are you getting there at that point? Looks quite. And the reason it looks difficult isn't because of game week 11; it's because of game week 12. So if you get to 11, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to move. I want to move this player. I want to move Chelsea because they've got Arsenal. I want to move this player to Newcastle, to a Newcastle player. Well, they've got Leicester the following week.
Yeah.
That's the point. You're looking at these runs and going, what do I want to sell to? What can I buy? What suddenly got shit? What's got good? So there's a number of got bad fixtures in 11 where, say, Manchester United don't completely agree, but then they've all got good fixtures in game week 12. And in terms of, you can say, oh, Tottenham's got that terrible game week 12 fixture at Manchester City that would have got in 11.
Yeah, I guess this is just if you're trying to get ahead, right? One of the things in FPL is if you can jump on a curve before everybody else does, you can do well. This is where I'm thinking maybe it might be an opportunity to try and go against what everybody else is doing.
Which is why I highlighted Manchester United in game week 8.
Mm.
to go earlier because that's
Go
the
early
end
for
of
Brentford
it's
at
the
home.
when that's the end of Chelsea's run.
Yeah.
So you could go Chelsea to Manchester United in 8. That's easier. So yes, I agree with you. Manchester United's free fixtures 8 to 10 aren't spectacular, but it is kind of the Chelsea jump off point. Whereas when you hit
Yeah.
11, the jump off point isn't there. So
Hmm.
this is part of the reason of putting this in place to highlight, okay, maybe I need to look at Manchester United a little bit earlier in their run because that's the Chelsea hop off point. I think obviously depends what we think on Manchester United, how they start. You might get to October and they might have a new manager in place, mate. Game week 12, as mentioned, has really good runs. So there is obviously a case to come off Tottenham now. And I think it's worth saying Arsenal come off the really bad period of those three fixtures. So there is a case to go back, say, from Tottenham to Arsenal in game week 12. And it also begins to get better again for Chelsea after their really bad four fixtures as well. So I could see people landing game week 12 if they had Heung-min Son as an example. And if they haven't got like Palmer, Saka, and definitely making that sort of move there in game week 12. It's worth saying, though, the Manchester City game for Tottenham in game week 12 is the only one that's kind of bad. They do have some difficult fixtures afterwards leading into Christmas, but they are at home basically, Chelsea in 15 and Liverpool 17. Otherwise, Tottenham's run from 13 to 19 straight after Man City is quite good.
Yeah.
So I've actually highlighted that you might even want to sell Tottenham in 12 and go back in 13 because in 13, Manchester City go to Liverpool.
No,
So
that leads into your free hit
yeah,
narrative a little bit.
a little bit.
If you're heavy on Spurs at that time.
Well, I think that would be the one as well. Like, say Tottenham did get off to a flyer, and suddenly you were sitting there, and you, oh shit, I've got Son, Richarlison, and Madison for whatever, or Porro, perhaps is a better example. Oh, I don't really want to sell this, but oh yeah, and it's Man City away in 12. Oh, and all the other big clubs have a great fixture. Yeah, Tottenham could well be a narrative that plays into the idea of a free hit 12, and would never have looked at this sort of thing in the past. But clearly, there isn't going to be the requirement for the free hit in the later stages of the seasons. There would have been. It may still be very useful for a blank or double, by the way. It may still be, particularly around game weeks 33 and 34. Game week 14, Suj, if you've invested heavily in Manchester United, they go to the Emirates. Now, there are some good home fixtures, particularly afterwards, but they also go to the Etihad in game week 16. So don't know if you're going to want to look at over a 3-week period, the two toughest away games if you're carrying a Fernandez, for example. And I think the fixtures very briefly come back around for Villa, Brentford at home, Southampton at home immediately off that. You might want to jump to United's Villa. And also, it's the end of Brentford's run, where they've had a really good run of fixtures from game week 6 that begins with West Ham at home, ends in game week 13 at home to Leicester. That's a really good stretch for them. And it feels like a really good entry point for your boys, Suj. For West Ham, game week 14, Leicester, Wolves, Bournemouth, Brighton, Southampton over a 5-game stretch before playing Liverpool and Manchester City. So perhaps Brentford to West Ham, Bumo to Bowen, that sort of level of
Yeah.
transfer. Tony to John Duran, maybe. Suj, I've heard the rumours.
It might be Tony. You never know.
What's really interesting is I've looked at all the weeks throughout the whole season about potential pinch points to buy and sell players. Game week
Yeah.
15 to 17, I don't think is great to buy anyone. Game week 18, City and Liverpool, I think really back on the table. If you look at them 17 fixtures, Liverpool go to Tottenham, City go to Aston Villa, Arsenal are at Crystal Palace. There's not a lot there to love. Chelsea go to Everton, but I think their run in terms of investment is either before or later on. And although Newcastle go to Ipswich, that's the end of their next good cycle of run. You may want to be moving them on. I've highlighted potentially to do that in game week 19, so you wouldn't want to go and invest there. So 15 to 17 might be a really good period where you could roll a few transfers, I think. Particularly if you stayed with the big hitting clubs during their more difficult period, because it just naturally slowly begins to get better. And then for City, Liverpool, it really does in game week 18. Now, when you've got two teams like City and Liverpool coming into a really good run together at the same time, and it's worth saying game week 18 is Boxing Day, by the way, kids. So if you do want to get pissed Christmas Day, it's perhaps not ideal for you. But if you've got two clubs together like that, coming into really good runs at the same time, that is the sort of point that I think you go, do I want a wild card?
Yeah, and I
But
mean,
you may well have
Chelsea are
rolled.
there.
You may well have
They
rolled.
start earlier with a good run. I think Tottenham got a reasonable run.
You may well have rolled a good number of transfers before
Well,
you got
this
to
is
this
it,
point.
right? I was gonna say to you, like, you got to use your first wild card by the end of game week 19, right? Halfway through the season. If you roll from 14, 15, 16, 17, and you do a mini wild card, let's call it, with all your free transfers in 18, 19, then you don't need to use your wild card then, which then means your window of using your wild card is game week 1 to 14 because you're planning on rolling. Now, the best laid plans, right? It's going to go wrong. But regardless, if that's your strategy and you're thinking, right, between 14 and 18, I don't want to use my wild card because I'm going to roll them all up because I'm going to set myself up, then you're narrowing your window for your wild card from 1 to 14. So then it's a slightly different strategy around then.
I think the first wild card will be used quite early by a lot of people. I what I see in terms of if I don't use it probably in say the first 8 to 10 weeks, it's definitely getting held for that in like 18. I cannot see me using it over that period of sort of 11 to 17. The fixtures for the
Are
best
you kind
teams
of
are just
basically
too
saying if you
tough.
need to pull it out up until up in the first 10, 10, 15 weeks, you'll do it. And if you don't, then you'll just leave it till game week 18.
Well, I think the only reason to even say 10 is that bit where Arsenal and Liverpool obviously come into playing each other in 9 and City have that Southampton fixture. I mean, we're going to look at some weeks. This will particularly be beneficial for those on YouTube. I'm going to show like a rolling 5-week graphic of certain fixtures. It shows difficulty from ranking from top to best. And we're going to show you some bits where why maybe you wouldn't wildcard in that first period. A lot of this, I think, relates to finding good runs. So if we start with
YouTube.com/planet FPL. Just saying.
it still works on the audio because we'll discuss who's got good and who's got
Yeah,
bad.
but
But
just saying, and while
the
you're there, hit those
subscribe,
buttons.
hit the like
Yeah,
button.
all that
It
stuff.
does
Like
help.
it. Yeah.
Most of us know who's got the good fixtures and at the start of the season, right? If you look at the first 5 game weeks from game week 1, I mean, Liverpool, Newcastle, Villa, great runs. We mentioned, investing in Southampton, Fulham from game week 2. They've got difficult game week 1s, but some nice runs from game week 2. It's interesting, obviously. Arsenal got quite a difficult run. I think if you group that 5 with the trips to Villa, Tottenham, Manchester City, this is all easy to look at. We can all look at difficulty first 4, 5, 6, 10 even, whatever your preference is. There's loads of tools out there. But what I recommend people do is jump ahead. So if you're looking at game week 2, like say I might be, because I might bench boost in game week 1 and generally wild card straight out of it. Chelsea, for example, obviously look much better once they've got that Manchester City fixture out of the way. Manchester City themselves over that 5-week rolling period is a little bit better, but not massively because they've got obviously those difficult fixtures in 5 and 6. But as I discussed with either yourself or Clayton on a different pod, it's like, how would I wildcard in game week 2 and not put Haaland in there?
Yeah.
It would almost be suicidal, but then it's perhaps not the structure that I'd particularly want. So I think Villa, obviously, even more so come onto the radar, but you are going straight into Arsenal. Liverpool still got a good run. I don't think there aren't massive differences between 1 and 2. The way I described it was if I did bench boost in game week 1, my team would probably have a lot of red in it. And if I did then wildcard in game week 2, there'd be a lot more blue in it, i.e. Chelsea and Manchester City. They'd
James
probably have.
referring to kit colours there.
I am. Yeah, obviously. So I think most people got that. What was you referring to?
Nah, just there's so many colours on your Skittles spreadsheet, James. They're just making sure people are not thinking that you're using a fixture difficulty colour ranking or anything like that.
Oh no. This is all
The blue team and the red team. And
my
Aston Villa, we know is Claret.
my self-catered. Obviously, the darker the red, the more difficult this is, and the darker the green, the easier it is, in my opinion. FDR won't. Do you know FDR on FPL's official website has got 5 rankings?
Okay.
There's one of them they never use.
What's that? 0? No,
Yeah,
1.
it is in like the easiest. They never rank anyone on the easiest. So most people think it's only ranked over 4. It's ranked over 5. I want to jump to game week 5, Suj, because I think this is quite interesting. So looking at a 5-week period, game week 5 to 9,
9.
And you look at the teams who've got the best fixtures. Everton,
Yeah.
Villa,
Yeah.
interesting, yeah. But remember, we know Villa's good run started in game week 3.
Yeah.
Leicester, despite the fact there's a trip to the Emirates in game week 6, really good fixtures either side. Brentford, and that's despite the fact they've got trips to Tottenham and Manchester United in that period. Ipswich, coming to a good run themselves from sort of game week 3, because obviously they start with Liverpool and Manchester City. Yourself, Suj, is
Hmm.
okay. It's not brilliant. Forest is not bad. Anyway, point being is those teams have just listed is only Villa from your big 8, and that's because the tail end of this is coming into the difficult fixtures, and obviously City and Arsenal obviously play each other in game week 5 as well. So like the point being is, if you was to wildcard in game week 5, like what are you attacking here in this particular scenario?
Well, attacking differentials, James, potentially, if that's your flavour of the game.
Yeah, could be. Show you a different example. Game week 8, still got Everton best here on this ticker, by the
Yep.
way. Now, this is where I'd highlighted sort of the movement of Manchester United to Chelsea at this point. So, Manchester United on my ticker, game weeks 8 to 12, I've got second. I've got Chelsea second worst. I've also got Brighton's the only team I've got below them, playing Newcastle, Liverpool, and Man City over that period. But if you look just above Chelsea, you've got Bournemouth, fine. But above that, Arsenal, Liverpool, West Ham, Villa, Newcastle.
Hmm.
So Manchester City is not bad over this period, because that's the back end of the Fulham fixture, and you've got Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth, Brighton, Tottenham. That's a decent 5 for City. So City's 5's okay, but I think you probably would have wanted to attack it in 7 or are waiting for 9 when Arsenal, Liverpool play each other. If you want a wild card to game week 8, and we've said that's a possibility, okay, what are you attacking now? The teams with the best fixtures: Everton, Manchester United, who we might feel shit about, Brentford, Leicester, Ipswich, Fulham.
Yep.
I'm not sure that you're going to want to. If you fast forward a couple of weeks, Serge, have a look at game week 10.
Yep.
Wolves, this is the beginning of Wolves, really good run. Again,
Yep.
the 6 teams I've got on my ticker with the best fixtures: Wolves, Everton, Brentford, Fulham, Ipswich, Palace. There is nothing wrong with investing in these teams, and it might be that attacking these teams, suddenly attacking into 8 Norrie, for example, Leif Davis, Emil Smith Rowe, if he's at Fulham or Crystal Palace, respectively, as enabling prices that allows you the bigger premiums. Great, fine, but there has to be a question mark about how much of the bigger premiums you want, because now you're in a period where suddenly City's fixtures against Liverpool, for example, is getting closer. So you're getting closer to their tougher run. Arsenal are still in the middle of a tough run. So are Liverpool. Newcastle play Arsenal in game week 10. Tottenham have got City, cut the weeks later. Again, what do you want to invest in now in terms of wild card? So when we mentioned sort of 1 to 10 as like wild card earlier, but then when I look at, say, investing during, say, weeks 8 or 10, it looks shite, really. So I
Yep.
think it almost is forcing in even earlier. Are we looking at a period here where we want a wild card sort of game week 1 to 4, or wait all the way possibly to December? Now, listen, things can happen where obviously you get a lot of problems, players out of form, injuries, etc. It's going to be personal circumstance where you want to do it. Let's fast forward another couple of weeks, Suj. Take your game week 13. Again, Wolves best. Brighton have now come into a really good run, and Newcastle are getting closer to a good run. Ipswich, good run still. Leicester, good run still. West Ham have got to get through the Arsenal game, but then that's the beginning of West Ham's good run. But I don't think it'd be the worst thing to go a week early on teams about to come into a good run.
Hmm.
Tottenham's not too bad, but Liverpool, City, Arsenal, it's indifferent. Now, with them 3 teams, particularly if Liverpool can maintain the standards they've shown over the last few years, it is worth always the caveat that Jamie Roberts tells me when he looks at championship teams. If the team's not good enough, don't worry so much about the fixtures and that, right? If someone's good, they're
Yep.
good.
Yep.
And obviously for
Yep.
City and Arsenal, particularly, and maybe Liverpool, and maybe others will show it this year. Obviously, if a team's really good, worry less about the fixtures. But even over this period, we know this historically, right? If Haaland's going to Liverpool in game week 13, we very much know we can take that on from a captaincy perspective, don't we?
Yep.
Here's the interesting thing. Look at game week 13 just in isolation. And this is miles away. If those were the fixtures now in game week 1, who do you think you'd captain in game week 13?
Uh,
Thanks for putting the air
it,
in for the benefit of the audio
uh,
listeners.
if I start with a Spurs attacking asset, maybe Richarlison. I'm thinking about starting with Richarlison to move to Ollie Watkins, maybe depending on fitness, right? I don't know where he's at the moment. He did was he not going on tour, but should be
Richarlison,
fit soon? Yeah.
we're not sure. We'll probably find out
Okay.
later today, ironically.
But like,
We're
I
not
mean,
sure.
if I was to start with him, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I can't if I just look at that week in isolation. But if 13 and 14 replaced 1 and 2, then I'd highly likely start with him and move it to Ollie Watkins. And then that Fulham at home fixture might be one that I go to. But I wouldn't want any of City Liverpool as a potential risk. Arsenal away at West Ham, like you know what happened there last season at our place, but new manager. We also know what happened at their place last season. I've got to bring that back up to try and save some respect, mate. But we know what happened at our place last season. So maybe I would look at that, but I don't think you can comfortably say that the games this year are going to be anywhere the same as last year, new manager.
If that was the opening set of fixtures, that would be mad interesting for captaincy, I think. I
I'd
generally
go
don't know what people
Spurs.
do.
I'd go
I,
attacking Spurs.
I think I'd go Salah, even though they're playing City. It's
You're not going to start
Anfield.
with Haaland though, are you?
But here's an interesting point, and why I reference this really importantly about Game Week 13. We are going to cover captaincy in way more detail over coming weeks, particularly in the week in the build up to the season starts. But you look at Haaland in 13 and go, oh, yeah, Liverpool way, I definitely want to take him on. There ain't a lot to take him on with.
Mm.
And that sort of thing, I think, does need bearing in mind. Now, if you jump to Game Week 15 on this 5-week ticker, Suj, and look at the teams at the top, look at the difference that's building. Arsenal, Chelsea, Newcastle, West Ham, Liverpool, Tottenham are now the top 6 here in terms of difficulty. And I think it's worth saying City, United, Villa are in the middle of that table. So none of the big sides are near the bottom. But this is also, ironically, the period where we'd said, maybe this isn't a good week to buy. You might even want to roll a few periods here. So maybe this might even be the period to go on wild card, maybe. I just think when I look at things that have happened weeks before for some of those good teams, like Chelsea are at Southampton in 14, Arsenal got Manchester United at home is reasonable in 14. Newcastle, Liverpool admittedly play each other. West Ham good run starts the week before, was said against Leicester. But I think when you package this is what I said, it makes you think, should I wait till December? Because this is the bit where it really flips. From 13 into 14, you can see the good runs beginning for those better teams. And then 15 again. Also, it's worth saying, we've got 8, I think, really strong teams at the moment. And other teams like Palace, yourselves, Suj, West Ham, etc., Brighton, who knows, might want to push through more. But we might also hit this period where, imagine the scenario here where City, United, and Villa, just hypothetically, are really underwhelmed. I think City will regress a bit this year. I've said that a few times. And those teams at the top 6 of that bracket are perhaps all doing quite well, or perhaps better than our expectations, at least say. That's attack for a wild card, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
It's this period here is the one bit that makes me reluctant not to just be using the wild card early. Just show you one more example of this as well. Game week 18. And the reason this is particularly relevant is because of who jumps back to the top. That Manchester City run from game week 18, which, as I said, is the Boxing Day set of fixtures. Everton, Leicester, West Ham, Brentford, Ipswich. It is City's best run of the whole season. It is also a very good run for Chelsea. And you've still got Liverpool and Arsenal near the top of that ticker for fixtures as well. And I think there are sides like Fulham, good run, Crystal Palace, good run, who might be able to offer you nice enablers who may well have decent seasons. So it's highlighting those points, sort of 14, 15 and around game week 18. And what you've got to think is longer term, how am I getting to deal with that point if I don't have the wild card there? I've used it over that period quite successfully in a number of seasons, but I also accept that that's possibly handicapped me in the period before where I've started too slowly. I think I was watching Mark and Az the other night on Black Box, and Az is absolutely right when he said it really feels like you need to hit the start of this season quite hard and early, I think. And particularly because that dip in the fixtures sort of over the October, November period before you come back to December. There's the opportunity here where you can roll and have your mini wildcards back in December to save you, I think. So
Well, this is it,
my
right?
current thought process to be go
I
early.
get saving the wild card for then, but then I'm just looking at it thinking, but I got the opportunity to roll five transfers. So do I need to? Like I could change my strategy around again with City in that period. I'm unlikely to have 0 City going into that period. I'm sure I'll have 1 at least, maybe 2. So then I can only add 1 or 2 more because we can only have 3 of them. So how many City am I needing to add then? It's not going to be a complete overhaul of the team to suddenly buy 3 because the likelihood is I'll have a couple, which makes it leans even more into the fact that I may not need to wildcard, and 3 or 4 transfers will get me to what we may consider optimal during
So
that
so the
period. So
point being is if you go back to game week 10, which we'd said kind of that period from sort of like 10 up to 14, 15, I don't see a lot of wild cards being used. Rather than perhaps looking at those little bits there, we ascertained and went, maybe okay, buy buy some Newcastle in game week 11, for example. Maybe it is that. Maybe you do need to go earlier on these runs, like the Manchester United game week 8 rather than 11, and look at that period from game week 10 around where a lot of the big clubs have got shite fixtures, and you just go, I'm just going to take this for what it is and rely on the consistency of Isak's, Watkins, Palmer's, Foden's, Saka's, whatever you've got, and say, right, they're consistent as they're just staying for me. Do we think as FPL managers we can do that though?
no, impossible.
Some can, some
Impossible.
can't. But maybe that,
Those
maybe
who
that,
forget deadlines might be able to.
maybe that will be the trick. Wild card really early. That period, sort of 10 to 14, leave it be as much as you can, and then go and attack again, building into really good December period for a lot of the better teams.
Yeah, I mean, one of the advantages of early chip use, and you will have had it with your bench boost early last season and people at wildcard early, is once it's no longer on the table, it doesn't cloud your judgment anymore of A and B because you only have the option of A. Some people like to just burn their chips so that it doesn't then maybe perhaps stop them seeing the wood for the trees later on where you're like, okay, but I've got this strategy because I've got this chip. Well, if you don't have it, then you don't play in the same way as if you do with decision paralysis or too many options. So I do like the thought of, okay, if you use it early to be aggressive, it will go one way or another. It might get you ahead. And it's always easier being ahead than maybe chasing. And then the way you play the game up until game 19 is a lot simpler, I would say, because you don't have that complication potentially down the line.
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
Do you want to look at some of the questions we've gotten on the
Yes.
internet?
Yeah, let's finish off with that.
Yeah, let's have a look here. Okie dokie. Well, no question, James, but FPL GM says that your spreadsheet and graphics are a colorblind person's worst nightmare.
Yeah, I accept that. There are also my planner,
High
which is
contrast
available
version is what you need, James. Accessibility mode.
our planner that is available for our patron has lots of different versions, and I do intend to just do a black and white version actually, because a lot of people do feed it back, and I do absolutely accept that. The problem is my rating is over 10 different difficulty ratings, which makes it quite difficult. Just do it as a black and white feature, but I have got some simplified version of just 3 different difficulty ratings. There's one that people might have seen, one of the images I've got, which like breaks down fixtures just against the top 8, and then obviously the other 12. There's lots of different stuff on my planner. Unfortunately, there's no use for Sky Fantasy Football, but it's all set up for Telegraph now if people want to use it.
Right, cool. You did say we'll promise a number of questions as long as they're good. Any that are asking about specific players as options when we're talking about fixture swings?
Oh no,
Maybe
it's all
not.
right. I don't mind covering some other questions as a general.
Sure.
Yeah, fine.
Well, let's go to FPL Gas, Dan. How good an option is bench boost in 1 and wildcard or free hit in 2? He says, asking for a friend. I'll also chuck in Who asked another question on early wildcard? Trackstar, genuinely considering game week 1 as a free hit and then wildcarding in game week 2. Now that we can save up 5 free transfers, what's your thoughts on this as a strategy? We've just spoken about it, but early chip usage, James.
Yeah, in the build up to the season in the final week, we will do a chip strategy specific podcast. And it's at that point when I go into that, I think I will know what my decision is. I would say I'm 50-50 at the moment on just bench boosting 1 and wildcard in 2. So honestly, it's 50-50. Last year I bench boosted in 1 and yet didn't wildcard till December period. If you'd have said to me, I said this on my stream Friday, if you'd have said to me this time last year, you're going to bench boost in game week 1, I'd have called you I'd have said you don't know me. And yeah, I ended up doing it. It just fell into place because of enablers standing up. People like, oh, yep, I know Garnacho's going to play. There were little things like that. And he didn't do anything, by the way, in game week 1. But it was just little things like that fell into place where suddenly it was on the table, because the more I analysed what I thought was going to happen with the blanks and doubles at the end of the season meant I just didn't think it was going to be as relevant. And as I also said on that stream on Friday, I think ultimately it was a mistake that I bench boosted in game week 1. Mistake is harsh, but did I win, if you will? No, I also don't think I particularly lost. But I think for me as a strategist, the opportunity was massive at the end of the season, and I had to just fight with people. And I thought, okay, but I would have done really well if I'd had that bench boost at the end, because what I ended up wildcarding and stuff wouldn't have been miles away from the bench boost, because of the doubles that did happening were better than I expected. This year, we definitively know that there's going to be less doubles, subject to the shit we can't see, major deaths in the world, weather, etc. Certainly, cup postponements are obviously going to be way less, just purely because the FA Cup quarterfinal has its own weekend. It's not going to clash with Premier League fixtures. So you could get ultimately 8 fixtures, in theory, could get postponed on FA Cup quarterfinal weekend. But there's none. So you're relying on the League Cup final. And by the way, anything postponed from that week could be played near enough straight afterwards, subject to who's in the final. And then the FA Cup semi-finals. And again, unless it's teams that's in Europe, they might get played straight away. I do think, and we'll cover it in more detail, it does look like we'll probably get some doubles in 33 and some blanks in 34. But how good or bad that's going to be is dependent on who's going to be playing in the cup semi-finals themselves in 34. If you've got 4 teams who are in European competition and they're not playing each other in 34, then it might be game week 34 only has 6 fixtures. It's a possibility. And the chances are those fixtures will get brought forward, I think, to the midweek in 33 is the most obvious. Because they've said they'll try and keep the midweek free for before the FA Cup final. Though if the Carabao Cup final and FA Cup final were both Arsenal and Manchester City, I think that's impossible. And when you're projecting these sort of things at the moment, you can only really project that those are the 2 best teams, and that's the eventuality. So there is a small possibility you could end up with something in sort of 36 or 30 or 37 as well. Maybe, I think 37 pretty unlikely.
So, which, I mean, if these guys go out of Europe early, then that
it's not going to be anywhere near last season. And it's not even impossible. I would say it's not even impossible that there's no double game week this year. I think that's incredibly unlikely. But if you were to have, with all due respect, perhaps say 2 mid-table teams who've got nothing to play for end up, or even 4 in the FA Cup semi-finals, if you ended up with just hypothetically Wolves, Everton, Brentford, Nottingham Forest, something like that, yeah, I don't even think it's even improbable that you ended up with nothing, possibly.
Jazz wants to know,
I'll
James,
cover that in more detail later on.
When the correspondent pods are coming, tell him and tell everyone else.
Say that again.
When are the correspondent pods coming, James?
Correspondent week will be Monday, August the 5th to Friday, August the 9th. I can tell you that will kick off with Adam Pritchard from our Arsenal correspondent. Get the worst out of the way first. And it's not against Adam, it's just against Arsenal. 8 a.m. Friday, August the 5th. The audio might be slightly before. Video will go out at 8 a.m. And that will conclude with Dan Lord, our Liverpool correspondent, at 11 p.m. on Friday the 9th. So we are going to condense it all into the Monday and the Friday. I said on Friday's stream, I will try and keep them to a max 45 minutes this year because I realise I go on way too much. But yeah, one podcast on all 20 Premier League clubs between the 5th and the 9th of August. And then the following week, we'll do some specials on kind of a definitive final watch list, captaincy, chip strategy. We'll open up for another Q&A most likely. We'll do final drafts. That'll all come in the final week afterwards as well.
Cool, cool. We'll do a player question. FPL T-Bird, what's your thoughts on Emil Smith-Rowe if he moves to Palace?
Yeah, I mean, if he
position
moves,
to Eze, right? Do you think
interesting.
he'd go out to the right, Smith-Rowe? I think they play with 2 10s like they did.
Yeah, I mean,
behind
that kind of
Mateta.
what you, in a weird way, you probably look at him being Elise's replacement.
Yeah.
Very different profile of player, obviously. My concern with someone like Smith Rowe would be exactly what I think the Arsenal fans will tell you is the injuries.
Yeah.
Would
I
be
think that's a
real
problem with
concern.
Eze, to be honest with you. I mean, he only started 24 games last year.
My concern with Eze, again, I keep referencing Friday's stream, but I spoke about him quite a bit in detail there. And his ownership's quite high at the moment. There's a few things I really don't like about that. One, his best mates left. And we did come to a conclusion last year that Eze and Elise, I wouldn't say needed each other, but from a fantasy perspective, it felt like they needed each other. That might be less
Although
of a...
Mateta's filled that.
Yeah, I was going to say, now Mateta's
mantle,
kind of taken some of the burden off the goal scoring. That might be less of a problem now. But I think in terms of team setup, when Eze and Elise were both on the pitch, you couldn't overcompensate on one versus the other. With all due respect, if Emil Smith-Rowe joins Crystal Palace, opposition teams are going to target Eze way more. The other thing is, we don't even know that he's going to stay. He's on a list of players with, say, Ivan Toney at Brentford that I just wouldn't want to be investing at the moment because I don't know where they're going to be. And I think there's a strong possibility that Eze will stay, but I don't want to start with a player like that in my FPL team. I don't think the fixtures are that good enough when I look at them going to Chelsea in game week 3, Liverpool in game week 7. I think I've got to have him. So good value player, but I'd almost rather, in a weird way, even though he's got tougher fixtures, I'd rather start with someone like Bowen, and I realize he's like 0.5 more. But I'd rather start with someone like that, who I'd feel way more confident he's going to stay at West Ham, and there's a good chance he's going to play as a number 9, unless you buy John Duran, Suj. But a better example might be Rashford.
But even then, Bowen's
Rashford
still going
at the
to...
same price.
It's still a threat off the right, as we've seen. So it doesn't necessarily reduce his
With
threat.
Newcastle's run, I mean, that 0.5 more for Gordon. And I know there'll be plenty of teams sit there with Gordon and Eze at the moment. Harvey Barnes is a player I really want to keep an eye on in pre-season. They scored the other day.
Last but not least, we'll go to Tricky Tree. He's got a couple of questions here. Early predictions for top 4 and bottom 3. Top 4, I'm going to give to Man City, Arsenal, Liverpool, and Chelsea.
I did this on Friday again. Arsenal City, I said it was still sensible to say Liverpool third at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not. I think the one that will recover and do a lot better this year is Newcastle.
Okay.
So I would say them 4th at the moment. It's worth remembering. I know last year 5th didn't get into the Champions League. It probably will this year. So
my 4 are in no particular order, just before anyone wonders. And bottom 3, I'm going with Ipswich.
You're going to say the 3 promoted clubs. I know you are.
Sorry?
You're going to say the 3 promoted clubs.
I'm going to put Forest in there. I think Forest is going to go down this year, I'm afraid.
You know the problem with Leicester,
I'm going to go with Ipswich, Forest, and Southampton. But I think Wolves might be the other one that's really down in danger down there. And I can see even Leicester struggling, but
Leicester almost definitely getting points deductions, boss.
Yeah, Leicester could be down there as well.
They've got a really challenging start as well. Play Tottenham, Villa, and Arsenal inside the first 6. Then there's a good run. I think for Leicester, you look at periods like 7 to 10. I think you've got to do really well over that period. If this point deduction comes, I think the competitiveness of the league just makes it so much tougher now. I think we all felt that the 3 that came up last year, with respect, were quite weak. A lot of us thought Burnley would do quite well. I think part of that was we really thought that Luton and Sheffield United probably wouldn't. And I think with these 3 teams, Leicester, Southampton, Ipswich, we all thought, well, these will be stronger. And I think as a collective 3, they probably are, right? I think Russell Martin's going to be really interesting, but I do think Southampton take a pasting or 2. Yes, I intend to captain Isak in game week 1, by the way. it's difficult to foresee any of them three staying up though, because I like Forest. I think will get better. I think Brentford had a lot of
Yeah, but
mitigating
I mean, with
circumstances
Forest,
with their
say
season
Gibbs
and
White, a
injuries.
bid comes in for Gibbs White and he moves on.
Everton, I just think under Dyer should be fine. Wolves have got a really difficult start. We spoke about them a lot last year about being concerned about them, and I think they should be fine. But the start is so rough that they might find themselves in a really bad position and might sort of struggle to get out of it. But then look at Bournemouth last year. Andoni Iraola also had that really difficult start, and he was kind of on the verge of being sacked, we thought, and then they flew, didn't they? So I wouldn't see them being in trouble. Brighton aren't going to be in trouble. Palace aren't going to be in trouble. It's difficult to look at who you think will drop into it because I just think teams like Forest, I think it'd be better, to be honest.
I think obviously transfer window big impact because if the likes of Gibbs White leaves, that could be concerning. For Brighton, this new young manager's the hottest thing from the school playground or wherever he's come from. But how do you know how he's going to react? He might try and overcomplicate it, and the wheels come off. There's a lot of unknowns there, but I do think, yeah, Ipswich unfortunately will struggle. But you never know. They're going to maybe set up defensively against some of the bigger teams and nick stuff. It's hard to break. All teams are hard to break down. You know, in the way we talked in the Euros about how some of the smaller nations are just now getting better and better and better. Same thing's happening in the league, where some of the smaller teams are more difficult to play against. Yeah, difficult one to call the bottom three. I feel like the top is much easier to call than the bottom.
Brighton play of last year's top eight, they play seven of them up to game week 11. Aston
Yeah.
Villa are the only one they don't play in that period. It's a tough period. In the middle, you got there's two Ipswich and Nottingham Forest fixtures. It is a tough period. But I'd say though, having looked at Hertzler quite a bit last week, like he's going to do something tactically that possibly no one else does in this league with not just the centre back stepping into midfield, but forwards dropping deep, central midfield players moving into forward positions. There'll be a lot of movement that will cause some real confusion for teams. I think it's a real shame for them that they've got a really difficult run of fixtures at the start. But I tell you what, they'll surprise in a couple of them, I think. And I wouldn't be concerned about them being in
But
relegation
again,
danger.
that could go the other way, and if
Us,
they don't get it right, they could get a few
do, you,
slappings as
do you
well.
remember the other day we were trying to count how many midfielders Brighton have got?
Yeah,
I
yeah. We're
saw
on page two.
I saw our good friend Dan FPL Chancellor posted a great stat. Each 21
Wow,
midfielders listed, which is the same number as players that West Ham have just listed overall.
wow, wow. James, before we go and wrap up, people that are on the old YouTubes are wondering why you have a ghost over your left shoulder.
It's
Explain, sir.
I shall. It's I wanted to promote it. No one's asked me to, but I went and watched a play. Yes, me a play at White Hart Lane last night, or do I have to say Tottenham Hotspur Stadium to be official? At White Hart Lane, which was held, and I think it's in their press conference area, maybe. Anyway, it was a little theatre inside White Hart Lane, and it's a play about John White, who was one of the best British footballers in 1960s, one of Tottenham's greatest ever players, one of Scotland's greatest ever players. John White lost his life at 27. He was struck by lightning on a golf course. And this is a one-person play that they held two showings at White Hart Lane last night, and they're about to do a run in Edinburgh at the Underbelly Bristow Square, the Dairy Room. Mid-afternoon screenings. I think at 1:25. It's on from the 31st of July to the 11th of August, and then again from the 13th to the 26th of August. And I'm not one for theatre and plays, but I am obviously one for anything that's to do with Tottenham. Also touched me a little bit as well because I played football with John White's son,
Oh,
Rob.
nice.
So I used to play five-a-side with him. I played five-a-side with him for a long time before I knew that he was John White's son. And I'd obviously been recounted the story several times over because my father never repeats himself. So I was very familiar with the John White story. The play is about John's life, and it's also about Rob's life because Rob was 5 months old as a baby. when John unfortunately was struck by lightning. So Rob's entire life basically has been people telling him how amazing his father was at football, yet he can't feel it. And obviously, footage from that period isn't like now, it's not like you just smash on
No.
YouTube. There is obviously footage out there. But there's great tales of John's career. And he wasn't perfect as a human being. I won't give spoilers away. But it's a really, really interesting play about one of Tottenham and Scotland's greatest ever players. So that's going to be in Edinburgh. Highly, highly recommend it. If you like football and the theatre, and I don't suppose there's going to be too many people, but honestly, if you're in Edinburgh and you can make it one afternoon over the next couple of weeks or so, highly recommend that. Starts from July 31st. I'll put some details in the bio if anyone wants to ask me any questions. Happy to share as well. And
Lovely
you'd be
jubbly.
supporting a good friend of mine, Rob, who the Ghost of White Hart Lane is because he was nicknamed the Ghost of White Hart Lane because he just used to ghost past players,
Right.
essentially. And Rob's obviously written the book, the Ghost of White Hart Lane.
Lovely jubbly. I'm sure Adam from Above Average is the chairman of the Edinburgh Tottenham Supporters Association. He lives in Edinburgh, doesn't he?
What a great, does he? Is he in Edinburgh? What a great show.
I know he's in Scotland, and I've got a strong feeling he is in Edinburgh. And I've just made him the chairman of the Edinburgh Tottenham Supporters Association. So, and if he isn't, he should be. So, yeah, maybe he's a good one to jump on as well. Yes, indeed. If you want to support that, then please do. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed today's pod. Jump in the comments on YouTube.
You don't want to tell them what's still to come this week, even?
Oh, go on then.
Should do,
Go
really,
on,
shouldn't I? 3 o'clock, people's poll vote. There were 3 topics to choose from. One is the cost of football and primarily season tickets in the Premier League in the 2024-25 season. What does England's future look like now that Gareth Southgate's gone? Or Suj really, 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 and I mean really, wants you to vote for security at football. That will be available for a few hours on my Twitter feed at Planet FPL Pod from 3 o'clock today. On Wednesday, we're piloting a new show, the Clayton and James show. I won't say much more than that at the moment. That's going to be available on Wednesday. On Thursday, me and Clayton are going to specifically as well look at some of the new signings to the Premier League on the transfer window show, but specifically looking at players in a bit more detail. Those players we literally know nothing about. They've come from the outside to the league. We've just got clips on YouTube and relying on other people's info. We want to do a bit of a deep dive on players who've joined the league that we know nothing about. And on Friday, my Ask James stream will be at 6 p.m. Yes, late time. I know. Sorry. I am on dad duty because my boy finishes school on Wednesday afternoon for the summer. So there might be a little bit of contingency stuff going on during the summer. So it's going to be at 6 o'clock on Friday evening as well. Obviously means the audio probably be out sort of 7:30, 8-ish. But I'm not rushing out anyway because that's going to be your last bit of content till correspondent week. Although there are podcasts available on Patreon next week. Our Whatever Happened To series that will be available on Darlington, Rushden Diamonds, Gretna, Malaga, and Angie Makachala, which I know that's still not the correct pronunciation. I'm never going to get that right, so.
Fair play. Plenty of content coming at you all week. So make sure you are subscribed wherever you're listening to the podcast. And like I said, jump in the comments on YouTube if you disagree with any of our suggestions on fixture swings or there's any other ones that you like. And,
no one puts any comments when they agree.
Oh, yeah.
I disagree.
Of course.
It's much easier to disagree than
troll
agree.
us.
Yeah,
we should just ask people on purpose to just troll us, right?
Just put comments in. If you're saying something hateful about the pod on YouTube, it's helping the algorithm anyway. So crack on.
Yeah, do it. Stay safe. Look after yourselves. Ciao for now.
Don't really do hate, just constructive criticism, please. Love you all. Be nice to each other, everyone. Play it your way. Cue music, please. Man child.